זולצנבכר הוא אוצר ומנהל הפרוייקט של חידוש התערוכה הלאומית האוסטרית החדשה במוזיאון אושוויץ-בירקנאו. אני מתכבדת להזמין אותו להציג לנו את התערוכה החדשה, תהליך העבודה עליה, אתגרים ומגמות שעמדו בפניהם. בבקשה.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to the Mשואה Institute and the Ebert Stiftung for the invitation. Thank you, Mali Eisenberg, for organizing. I can't present you a new exhibition because it's far from being finished. It's just presenting conceptual work and planning. The new Austrian exhibition at the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum is planned to be finished in the autumn of 2017, but it's depending on the renovation of the barracks if we can manage that. In July 2009, in a movement to implement Item 17, responsibility towards the victims of National Socialism, of the chapter, I quote, Art and Culture, of its governmental program, the Austrian federal government resolved to renew, as they called it, the Austrian Memorial at the former concentration and extermination camp and present-day State Museum Auschwitz-Birkenau in Poland. It entrusted the National Fund for Victims of National Socialism with the planning and implementation of the entire project. Other countries and institutions were also confronted with the necessity of adapting their national exhibitions on the site of the former so-called Stammlager or Auschwitz I. Over the last few years, Russia, Belgium, France, the Netherlands, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia have all renewed their exhibition in the former inmate barracks. Israel, institutionalized by Yad Vashem, has built a new memorial for the murdered Jews, and a group of involved organizations, one for the murdered Sinti and Romanis. The State Museum Auschwitz-Birkenau in Oswiecim is also currently working on a new permanent exhibition, which, as far as I know, shall be opened in 7 years. But they already have started conceptual work for it. The first Austrian national exhibition in the museum opened in 1978. It was conceived mainly by Austrian survivors of the camp, mainly by Austrian political victims, and thought as a memorial for the Austrian victims of Auschwitz. Therefore, it clearly focused Austrians and moreover also Austria as victims of National Socialism, while glossing over the question of collaboration. For years, people mostly in Austria have been calling for the renewal of the 1978 exhibition in the light of the knowledge of an appropriate culture of remembrance and in keeping with the times. The main body of criticism came from Austrian visitors to the national exhibition, but the Austrian Consulate General in Krakow also received complaints from abroad. Above all, the main premise propagated by the exhibition, a huge panel at the entrance of the exhibit stating March 11, 1938, Austria, first victim of National Socialism, had developed as the bone of contention. This premise, this is an insight in the former exhibition, this premise, of course, was no longer defensible, nor did it conform with Austria's official stance nowadays, following the avowal in the 1990s by Federal Chancellor Franz Vranitzky, declared in the Austrian parliament as well as in the Knesset, I quote, of shared responsibility for the suffering that, although not inflicted by Austria as a nation, was indeed inflicted on other people and peoples by citizens of this country. Quote end. In a consequence of this, the Austrian government decided the renewal of the exhibition. It was dismantled and removed. Now it is preserved in large wooden boxes in an appropriate depot in Austria. Besides, that is something probably quite new in the discussion of museums and exhibitions, that exhibitions are entirely kept for eternity in large wooden boxes and never will be seen again. In 2012, the National Fund was also entrusted with carrying out the renovation of the former prisoners' barracks number 17, where the old and the new exhibition has been and will be housed. Unfortunately, the building is in a rather bad condition and the renovation turns out to be rather elaborate. Certainly each step can only be undertaken with the consensus of the museum, the owner of the site, as well as the conservation authorities. The National Fund has already carried out the necessary preparatory work, structural reports on the building, the development of a renovation concept, conservational investigations, which, by the way, are over 200 pages of a manuscript, and a renewed survey of the building. The National Fund also was responsible for conducting 2 European Union-wide competitions, one for finding the best and most appropriate curatorial concept for the new Austrian exhibit, which has been won by a team consisting of Albert Lichtblau, Barbara Staudinger, Birgit Johler, Christiane Rothländer, and myself. To explain, I'm a long-time exhibition curator specialized on Jewish museum, mainly in Germany and Austria. Albert Lichtblau is professor for history at the University of Salzburg. Birgit Johler and Barbara Staudinger are two renowned curators, and Christiane Rothländer is a historian specialized on the history of the perpetrators in National Socialist area. The second EU-wide competition concerned the exhibition design and has been won by the Viennese architect Martin Kohlbauer. Kohlbauer is a renowned Austrian architect, and apart from constructing buildings, can show a long list of exhibition designs, many of them in Jewish museums, particularly of Austria and Germany. Here is a draft of the ground plot. The exhibition's content is being developed in close coordination with the State Museum Auschwitz-Birkenau, which has issued the following general guidelines for the national exhibitions at the memorial. The exhibitions must be of a historical nature. They must portray the deportations from that country and the circumstances surrounding them. They should not be a repeat of the permanent exhibition, but are instead to provide information on the fates of the deported and murdered peoples of that country up to the liberation of the camp on January 27, 1945. A discourse, this is central, on the politics of remembrance which goes beyond the camp and its historical context is not welcomed in the national exhibitions. Prior to the exhibition's installation, all texts must be approved by the museum. So everything, every text, every object, every item, every design, everything we want to do in the Barracks 17 have to fulfill those rules. Yet the most of those guidelines are more or less easy to fulfill. difficult, in my opinion, to obey is the guideline not to broach the issue of the specific national politics of remembrance. For in today's exhibition making about National Socialism topics, it seems quite obligatory to reflect not only what crimes happened, but also how they were kept in memory, be it in an official, say national, be it in a private memory. The new Austrian exhibition in Block 17 of the State Museum Auschwitz-Birkenau bears the title Far Removed, Austria and Auschwitz. The notion far removed refers to the geographical distance between Austria and Auschwitz, which was part of the Nazi strategy to conceal the mass murder. At the same time, removal meant extermination, the physical removal of the deportees from Austria and from the realm of the living. The original German title, as you can see, is Entfernung, which definitely refers on a much more explicit and obvious level to these double or threefold meanings of the title. The exhibition focuses on this notion of being far removed, bringing the historical origins in Austria and their culmination in Auschwitz closer to the visitors, removing the distance between the two locations, but without connecting them on one level. It is, as we heard before noon, another reflection of near and far, but it does that on a total different, bears a total different meaning of near and far. Because the implementation of this focus will be realized in an exhibition format that visualizes the distance between Auschwitz and Austria, at the same time connecting both places and their particular history. In order to grasp this notion, not only intellectually, but also visually and tangibly, the main elements of the exhibition consists of two interdependent and correlated levels. Here, Auschwitz, and there, Austria. Here, the level here tells of the Austrian victims and perpetrators, both, from the time of their arrival in Auschwitz. The genuine artifacts contained in vitrines are embedded in their direct spatial context at the location of the terror. Means in the level of here, we want to show real objects on the real site of murder. You can see it here. On that board in front. Or here for that wall. The level there is dedicated to National Socialism in Austria, its early history, the so-called Anschluss, the development and structure of the reign of terror, and the key figures involved and fates of those persecuted. This part of the exhibition, which will also be presented using artifacts in vitrines, is not actually there. Instead, it will be projected onto screens. Yeah, and here. The real here and the virtual there are thereby connected to each other by virtue of the illusion that the real vitrines continue to extend into the projection, with the real and the virtual vitrines thus forming a coherent whole. In the virtual level of there, meaning Austria, stories can be told from their beginning, and those stories will end in the level of here, meaning Auschwitz. From the point of view, from Auschwitz, everything that happened in Austria before or at the same time has lost its significance, and its importance. The fragile threads connecting the two places, times, and worlds are ripped apart. For those deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, their only reality was the system in the camp, which dictated who would live and who would die. This illusion is shattered as soon as a step is taken behind the screens into the inner room, as you can see here in the myth. The inner room that might probably named as void. The part of the exhibition dealing with the historical developments in Austria that's on the screen, and as such, everything prior to and far from Auschwitz in the level of there vanishes. It is exposed as a mirage, a mere memory. This sector of the exhibit will not just be empty. There will be two more but very different screens, empty and white. On their surface, the public can seemingly leave something. Visitors to the exhibition can write a message or draw a sketch with their fingers. It is meant to be a place of visualization of their own impressions and emotions. Yet, and this is important, especially important to me, these expressions, lines, or drawings will not stay there. They will vanish in a few seconds after having been written or drawn. Auschwitz is not a place where you can leave something. All being written or drawn will be sent to Austria as a message from Auschwitz and appear there in a public space, whereby the actual place in Austria, be it a museum or a memorial site, has not been fixed by now. The main questions the exhibition will deal are the big questions of the Holocaust and the Shoah as such. Yet it will be necessary to give answers in the borders of a national exhibition, which, as I stated, are forbiddingly not a repeat of the permanent exhibit of the State Museum of Auschwitz-Birkenau in Oświęcim. The questions, chapters, are four questions placed on four large 7-meter screens and vitrines. First, how could Auschwitz be possible? Auschwitz symbolically stands for the entire Holocaust and the Shoah. The exhibition aims to convey the polarization of the Austrian society, the involvement of Austrians in the emerging of the Nazi regime, and the developments that finally led to genocidal mass murder. 2. How did the Nazi power system work? And which of the structures of it were implemented or invented in Austria? How was the mass extermination prepared and operated in Austria? Ostracism, outlawing, persecution, and finally murder of certain groups of the population have been a distinctive part of the politics of National Socialism. For the establishment of this system of violence, specific institutions were founded and established. Laws of marginalization, discrimination were decreed step by step, leading to deportation and extermination. Different groups of victims had different fates, yet each group shall be addressed in the new exhibit. First of all, Jews, then political enemies of National Socialism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Sinti and Romanis, the so-called criminals, the so-called asocials, and homosexuals. In Auschwitz, this system escalated to a monstrous extermination machine. In the exhibit, the entanglement between those structures in Austria and in Auschwitz should be conveyed. How did the persons involved act? As number 3. What were the possible courses of actions to the perpetrators? In which realms did the victims have a course of action in which not? The measures of discrimination and persecution of the Nazi regime had different impact on the people involved, be it as perpetrator, be it as victim of persecution. By the narration of concrete actions of singular actors, the exhibit will try to convey different courses of action, and by this reflect the concept of offender and victim, for example, as prisoner functionary in the camp. 4. How did and how could the system of extermination function until its very end? The liquidation of the camps of Auschwitz, the death marches to the west, the liberation of the survivors should here be narrated parallel to the liberation of their homeland and the end of war in Austria. The curatorial team stepped up to the challenges presented by the circumstances unique to Austrian history and the need to firmly anchor the exhibition at the International Memorial Auschwitz-Birkenau in a special way. In contrast to the exhibitions of other countries, which all had in common their occupation by the Nazis, the starting point for the Austrian exhibition is a different one. Due to the shared responsibility of large swathes of the Austrian population for the perpetration of Nazi crimes. People who lived in Austria were ruthlessly persecuted and murdered, becoming victims of the Nazi atrocities. Yet equally, people who lived in Austria or had been politically and socialized there were actively involved in the genocidal barbarism, some prominently, other less so. By portraying the entangled history of Austria's victims and perpetrators, it is hoped to make a contribution towards adequately conveying Austria's role in the history of National Socialism. Thank you.